We call the meeting to order of Special Act 22-8, the Task Force to Study Hydrogen Power. My name is Brian Garcia. I am President and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank. I am honored to be serving as the chair of this task force today. I wanted to welcome legislative leaders. They are on the call. They will say a few words in a few minutes. I want to welcome the members of the task force. There are several members on, and I'm just kind of looking at the list as you all come on online here. And your staff, there are associated staff that are helping some of you as well, which is great. And then I see our technical assistance consultants from Stratagen on the line as well. There may be a few members from the public too. Welcome everyone. Before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge the Green Bank team for getting us ready for today. It feels like a whirlwind the past month, just kind of getting things up and running from the passage of the legislation to bringing on board a consultant to help us through this process, to help support the process in getting everything ready for today. So big kudos to Blair, Backman, Rudy Stirk, and Sarah Harari. Thank you all for getting us to today. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm not sure, Representative Arconti, if you knew this or not, but you pick somebody who's a big proponent of hydrogen fuel cells. So I wanted to just kind of start us off by welcoming everybody to the Dr. Bernard Baker Green Hydrogen Room here at the Connecticut Green Bank. Dr. Bernard Baker was the founder of Fuel Cell Energy, and you're actually what you see of me. I'm in this room. This is the Dr. Bernard Baker Room. So I wanted to get it out up front, just to be clear on my bias. I do have a personal bias. I'm a proponent of hydrogen fuel cells. When I came into the clean energy space over 2 decades ago, one of the first things I saw was that NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab graphic there in the bottom right of the screen, which really shows an electrolyzer, a fuel cell connected to solar panels. There was a wind turbine in the back, all connected to vehicles. So it really got me motivated back then and still motivates me to today. Going back a few years, the South Windsor High School fuel cell was one of the first fuel cell transactions that the predecessor of the Connecticut Green Bank did, the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund. And that fuel cell actually served in a combined heat and power application and provided a critical facility to the town of South Windsor. I go way back. I think that was actually either an International Fuel Cells, IFC, or a UTC fuel cell PEM device. Now we're in the high axiom, a Doosan company world with that technology today. So it is a bit of a personal bias. We are at our headquarters here at the Connecticut Nonprofit Center in Hartford. And again, we're going to be managing the online aspects of this task force from the Dr. Bernard Baker conference room here at the Connecticut Green Bank. So just welcome everybody. All right, let's go to the next slide. So in terms of our agenda for today, we're going to have our Energy and Technology Committee leaders give us the charge for the task force. So we're going to start off with that. For those task force members who are on the line, we're going to do some introductions. I've got a list of you that I'm tracking here alongside me. Then we'll do an overview of the Special Act 22-8. We'll work into some process items, ground rules, structure, logistics, and timeline, trying to get us from here to there, the January date for our deliverable. And then we're going to turn it to our partners here, Stratagen, to give us a Hydrogen 101 presentation. And then we're going to wrap it up with public comments. So if there are members of the public, please just send us a note, send us a chat. We'll keep track of you and involve you here in this process. All right, let's go to the next slide. So really just wanted to acknowledge our Energy and Technology Committee leaders for pulling this special act together. We are working to assemble the task force. We are working to clarify the deliverables, so you'll hear some of that today. And I'm sure in the coming month, we'll be further clarifying those deliverables. but really just want to recognize your bipartisan leadership. I took a look at the bill. I think this was a unanimously bipartisan bill in both the House and the Senate. So kudos to your ongoing efforts to reach across the aisle when it comes to energy and technology. It's been that way for over 2 decades here in Connecticut. Let's go to the next slide. So we've got our representative leaders here today from the Energy and Technology Committee. And I'm going to start off with Representative David Arconti, who is the co-chair of the Energy and Technology Committee and who serves in the 109th District in Danbury, to get us kicked off and give us a charge. David, thank you for being with us here this morning, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brian. And I just want to start off by thanking everyone for agreeing to participate on this task force for the next 6 months. It's a really exciting time, I think, to be in this space. The task force is going to have an important role, important role to play, and it's an important first step to setting the right policy for Connecticut. Its role will be integral. The report is going to serve, as a policy playbook for the committee to draft legislation from next year. And ideally, the playbook will have policy recommendations for the immediate and long-term action. Section 1 of the bill does outline some policy tracks for the task force to consider. But considering the expertise on the task force, please don't feel boxed in by those recommendations in Section 1. This is an ever-evolving, issue. When we first drafted the bill, a lot changed just from in those couple months. We drafted, had a public hearing, and then, we had a 4-state policy proposal to DOE for a Northeast hydrogen hub. So things can and always should remain flexible, and I wish the task force the best of luck, and thank you again for agreeing to serve on it.
Excellent. Thank you for those the charge there, and we're definitely going to talk about it later in the construct of the statute, the 7 areas that are articulated in the statute, but also, as we heard there from Co-Chair Arconti, we should be flexible in terms of thinking about other opportunities that come our way and that we think about through this process. So thank you for that charge, David. Let me see if Representative Ferraro is on the line. Representative Ferraro, are you there? Okay, I see a few telephone numbers, but I don't see his name on. So Senator Formica, we're going to turn it to you, the ranking member representing the 20th District. That covers quite a few towns: Basra, East Lyme, Old Lyme, New London, Salem, Waterford, and portions of Montville and Old Saybrook. Good morning, Senator.
Am I muted or unmuted? I'm sorry, I can't tell from this phone.
There you go. You're perfect. You're good now.
My apologies.
No problem.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you again and echo the words of the great chairman, co-chair of the committee, David, who will be incredibly missed for his leadership and work ethic on this committee. But we're very excited as a team to have this task force underway, because I think we all know what's happening in energy in Connecticut. Look at the change over the last 7 years in what we've been able to accomplish in the switch to focusing on renewables and other forms of energy opportunities. And this task force will play a huge role in how Connecticut moves forward. We all know that infrastructure takes time. I remember first selectman as East Lyme putting in a water system between 2 towns took almost 5 years to design and develop something like this. And we're talking about a statewide initiative of a new energy opportunity. So the sooner we get started, I think the better we are. Connecticut's well positioned with nuclear. here in my district, in Dominion, offshore wind, again, in my district. You heard about fuel cells, the opportunity there. Storage is on the brink, and transportation potential for this sector, I think, is going to be, a large possibility too. So this study will hopefully touch and begin to touch on all of the how-tos to get this operation started, get this possibility started. So, I look forward to kind of watching it and seeing what's happening and being a part of it to the extent that I can. But thank you all. And Brian, thank you again for your leadership. You've done amazing work for the state of Connecticut in your time. So thank you all.
Great. Thank you for those charging words, Senator Formica. And just, to both you, Representative Arconti and Senator Formica, thank you for your service over the years. We've all been very privileged to work with two leaders like you who have taken the Energy and Technology Committee down extraordinary paths to not only helping Connecticut build its clean energy future, but also building its green economy. So thank you both for your leadership. You're going to be missed. We will try to keep you apprised along the way. I'm sure, definitely stay attuned to what's happening in this process. You're always welcome back to say words, but thank you for everything that you've done and for setting the course here for our task force today. Let's go to the next slide, Rudy. So we're going to have a few introductions of task force members, and I'll kick us off, but we're going to do the general name, organization sorts of things. But I want you to think about why you got involved in the energy field as part of your introduction. And I see a few, if I can just kind of say, just prep my deep and Pura colleagues, it doesn't look like the chair or the commissioner are on, so I may call on you as the staff support to do an introduction of yourself, which would be great. But let me start it off by just saying Brian Garcia of the Connecticut Green Bank. Actually, I got involved in clean energy by accident over 2 decades ago. I was an intern at corporate environmental programs for General Electric. And I got a call from a headhunter who was looking to find somebody to help start up the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund. And I can tell you that having just finished graduate school, I couldn't tell you the difference between a kilowatt or a kilowatt hour. I remember telling the headhunter that, he probably should be speaking to a couple of my colleagues that I graduated with. But given, my background in community development, he felt like there was something there for me in this new market. And I've been in love with clean energy ever since. So that's how I got involved in the energy field. I see President Merrick on the line, and I think what we'll do, Radenka, if it's fine with you, is we'll have you do an intro, and then we'll do the official designation transition to UR, if that's okay.
Absolutely. It's my great pleasure to be with all of you. I cannot be, as Brian says, I'm biased, but I started my career in fuel cells in late 80s and 90s in Japan. I had a great honor to meet Dr. Bernard Baker. He was, as Brian said, chairman and chief executive of the fuel cells, but more than that, he was leading authority in the world when it comes to fuel cells. So I met him in Japan in 90s, and he started his research on the hydrogen and fuel cells in 1959 at University of Amsterdam. So when I was a student in Japan, I learned that Connecticut is a birthplace of the fuel cells, and that Connecticut put men on the moon. And I asked how, and it says because the Apollo station was built on the fuel cells made in Connecticut, and that provided the energy and water for the crews. So we have the history, tradition, and people around the globe believe that Connecticut is still the leader when it comes to the clean energy, fuel cells, and hydrogen production. And I think it's very important to build on that notion that we are still the leader. I'm busy as a president, but I will help with the letter of intent for the infrastructure bill. I'm more than happy to participate and bring my expertise, and my expertise are in high temperature fuel cells, hydrogen production, low temperature fuel cells, but I also work on the batteries. So I think I have pretty good sense what is going to work in the future, how much it depends on the policy, but we have to move with infrastructure because we want to lead the world. We don't want to stay behind. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. All right, so Ur, why don't we, as the designation for President Merrick, Ur, you want to do an introduction? That would be great.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody. Ur Pasholar. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering and the director of the Center for Clean Energy Engineering at UConn. Looks like I'm not going to break the tradition of saying that I'm biased in hydrogen too. I've been working on hydrogen and related systems for over 2 decades. I actually went to grad school and did my PhD thesis on low temperature fuel cells. And as Radenka said, that's the reason that I'm in Connecticut to work on fuel cells and hydrogen and continue the tradition. At UConn, we do research on hydrogen and fuel cells, but more importantly, we also train the next generation workforce that I think is going to be very critical to make sure that this transition takes place. And we're happy to lend our expertise to the task force as needed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction, Ur. Yeah, it really feels like this is our moment, right? I mean, if we look at the history of clean energy innovation in Connecticut, from wind turbines to electric vehicles, right now is our moment for hydrogen fuel cells to deliver the future that we're all after. And it's just great hearing both of you. And we're going to have our next meeting, by the way, at the UConn Innovation Partnership Building. So thank you, President Merrick and Professor, for the invite for next month. All right, let's keep going on down the line here. And Kathy from Nell Hydrogen, do you want to do an introduction?
Sure. So I'm Kathy Ayers. I'm the Vice President of R&D for Nell Hydrogen. I've been here about 15 years. As far as my background in energy, I would say it started very early. My dad worked for one of the DOE labs his entire career, so I grew up in Livermore, California. Went to graduate school more on the solar side, and have kind of been migrating my way through different devices throughout my career, from solar to batteries to hydrogen. My arrival in Connecticut was also kind of like Brian, kind of by accident. I actually made a connection through a family friend of my husband's who lived in New Hampshire. And he asked, sort of as we were getting to know each other, whether I wanted to do something more on the green side, since I was working in primary batteries at the time. And long story short, I interviewed at Nell, which was in Proton, really loved it, and we moved the whole family here. So that's sort of my story.
Fantastic. Welcome. Welcome, Kathy. All right, so our deep colleagues, I see Bureau Chief Hackett on the line. Vicki, do you want to do an introduction? And I see some of your team on the line as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vicki Hackett. I'm the Acting Deputy Commissioner and the Bureau Chief at the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I started my career in energy in 2006 when I joined the Office of Consumer Counsel after being a litigator in the private sector. And I became involved in energy planning by leading OCC's efforts on integrated resources planning back in the days before the merger between the DEP and the DPUC, and have carried that experience over in energy and utility regulation and planning in my experience both at OCC and then joining Commissioner Dykes when she was the chair of PURA in 2017, and then following her over to DEEP, first as her chief of staff, and then as the deputy commissioner of energy, and now the bureau chief. So we have some concurrent work going on hydrogen over within our comprehensive energy strategy process currently, and also on the regional hydrogen hub. Which, so many familiar faces here, and I know you all have been working with many of you all have been working with our team, and we're happy to sort of provide a bridge into those processes.
Great, thank you for that introduction, Vicki. And we see some of your team on the line as well with Lauren and crew. So welcome. Let me turn it over to Diganto from Eversource.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diganto Chatterjee, Vice President, System Planning. Eversource, a quick background. I've been in this industry for over 2 decades. Started with power plant testing massive coal power plants. If you can believe it, that's the beginning of my career. Then moved on to doing system studies. My focus back then was in 2005 after the blackout, basically coming up with transmission upgrades that would be needed in Ohio to address what was the underlying underpinning of the blackout in Northeast, and then sort of moved from that to planning all transmission for MISO. So back then it used to be the northern MISO, North Dakota to Ohio and everything in the middle, and then took part in integrating Entergy into our footprint. So that was Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and part of Texas. And then after planning transmission from a reliability standpoint, I led the resource adequacy. So essentially creating multiple capacity pricing zones, understanding loss of load expectation, uncertainties in demand, uncertainties in generation, and being able to predict how much insurance policy we want to purchase as a system in Midwest. And that's, I think, relevant here in this discussion as we accelerate our transition to clean energy. I think understanding resource adequacy and its implications in a uncertain future is important as we plan out new generation resources to replace the old generation resources. And then I was in charge of transmission planning to relieve market congestion. So building transmission both from a reliability standpoint and from a standpoint of relieving market congestion. And then formed MISO's first zonal capacity construct, basically figuring out 7 different capacity pricing zones. MISO is very big. And then essentially moved from that to financing devices. So about 2 gigawatts of onshore wind farms across Midwest and in the Great Plains, Texas, all over in the middle of the country as part of GE Capital. My job was to do fundamental price forecasting for energy capacity and REC pricing forecasts. And then in my current role in Eversource, I'm in charge of all transmission, all distribution, bulk transmission, bulk distribution, storage, and standards, anything to improve reliability, resiliency, and setting up the infrastructure to meet the future electrification and clean energy needs. So as you can imagine, I have a very strong vested interest in this task force, not just from the fuel cell standpoint, but being able to use those fuel cells and hydrogen resources to reliably transition us to a clean energy future from a resource adequacy standpoint, from a supply standpoint, from a transmission integration standpoint, and from a distribution integration standpoint. So just happy and ecstatic to be part of this task force.
Fantastic. Wow. Lots of great experience and expertise there, Diganto. Thank you and welcome. I see. So it doesn't look like Chair Gillette is on, but it does look like Taryn. Taryn, are you there? You want to do an introduction? Or Julia?
Good morning. My name is Taryn O'Connor. I am the Director of Legislation, Regulations, and Communications for PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. My resume is much shorter than Mr. Chatterjee's, so but I will share that my entree into the energy space also happened, as some others on the call, pretty accidentally back in 2008 when I had been working at the Middlesex Chamber in Government Affairs and was encouraged to accept a position at the Consumer Counsel's office, which I did, and I was lucky enough to work with Vicki for a number of years there. I did have a focus while I was there on conservation. I spent some time serving on and chairing the Energy Efficiency Board, as well as the Low Income Energy Advisory Board for the state, before moving upstairs to Pura. So really happy to be here and to be with you all. And this is a very exciting time for the state, and this is really important and exciting work. So thank you so much.
Excellent. And Julia Dumaine is here with us as well, supporting Chair Gillette. I wanted to really say, thank you to the staff support too behind, all of us. Barbara Fernandez is part of the UConn team. We just recently reconnected through this. So it's really cool, Barbara, to be reconnected with you again. You raised some really important insurance related issues in one of our first calls. So very excited to have you as a part of the team as well. So those are, at this point, the official either ex officio or appointed members. There are still others coming in. The legislative leaders are still working through their process. I'll go through that in a little bit, but just wanted to welcome all of those task force members thus far, and thank you for your time that you'll be serving with us over the course of the next 6 months. Rudy, why don't we go to the next slide, and I will provide an overview on the Act. One more slide. So just a real quick overview on Special Act 22-8. This is really a timeline from start to finish. The act was unanimously passed on a bipartisan basis, as I noted before, in the early part of May, and then signed by Governor Lamont on May 23rd. That kind of puts the clock, everything kind of into motion. The act establishes a task force to study hydrogen-fueled energy in the state's economy and energy infrastructure. And it notes the first meeting no later than 60 days. So we're just within that by a couple of weeks. The composition, it's really specific in terms of the 21 members of the task force. So there are 5 ex officio members. We just heard all of them in those introductions, except one, which I will brief on in a second. I don't believe Joel is on the line. If he is, just send me a chat and I'll have you do an intro. And then we've got 16 political appointed members, and currently 4 of those are filled. And again, I'll go through those in a second. Our legislative leaders are working really hard. They're juggling a lot of things at the moment, but as we heard from Representative Arconti, they are working to identify their appointments. So stay tuned for additional appointments coming on to the task force. And our focus is to deliver this report no later than January 15th of 2023, right at the beginning of the 2023 legislative session. All of our findings and recommendations we will be communicating to the Energy and Technology Committee, which is the committee of cognizance for the Special Act. So at a high level, that is the overview of the Act. We're going to get into some detail on some of the specific deliverables in a second. Let's go to the next slide, Rudy. So we heard a few of the staff members supporting the ex officio members and some of the ex officio members themselves. Commissioner Dykes from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, being supported by the Bureau Chief, Vicki Hackett, who was introduced today. We've got the chair of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, Marissa Gillette, who was supported by Taryn O'Connor, who did the introduction today, and Julia Dumaine. For the University of Connecticut, we're privileged today to have President Merrick with us, who has designated UR to serve on behalf of the University of Connecticut. Joel Reinbold wasn't able to be with us here today, but he is the Director of Energy Initiatives at the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology. So all of you who have been involved with Joel know his work with the Connecticut Hydrogen Fuel Cell Coalition, and just a long history in terms of helping us understand a lot about the fuel cell and hydrogen industry here in the state of Connecticut. And then myself, but I am supported by and close, we're kind of partners in crime on this, Sarah Harari, who's the Associate Director of Technology Innovation at the Green Bank, and Senior Advisor to myself. So I'm really excited for Sarah to be involved here, which essentially means, when I'm out, she'll step in, but you'll also see her very active along the way, helping us kind of move the needle in terms of our ex officio members. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of where we are with the political appointed members on the task force, so we've got 4 currently of the 16 by statute that have been officially appointed. We've received appointment letters from their political appointers. So the Speaker of the House, Representative Ritter, has his 2 appointments. So we heard from both Deganto and Kathy this morning from Eversource and Nell Hydrogen. And Representative Candelora has 2 of his 3 appointments. Mary Nuara, who was unable to be with us today. She has some circumstances that came up, but will be joining us next time from Dominion Energy. Excited to see Mary coming on board, and William Smith from Infinity Fuel Cells. There are a few outstanding appointments open from Senators Looney, Kelly, and Senator Duff, and Majority Leader Rojas, who, as I noted before, are working hard. I've seen them working behind the scenes on getting these appointments in check. Just to give you a sense of some of the areas of expertise that they're diving into, electric distribution company involvement, also the natural gas company involvement, hydrogen manufacturers here in Connecticut. The building trades is also a big point here, as well as environmental non-governmental organizations that have a renewable energy advocacy focus. So several other appointments still to be made, and we'll be working with the appointers over the course of the next month to get them geared up and prepared for our August meeting. All right, let's go to the next slide here. And I'll try to pause along the way. So if members of the task force have questions or comments as we work through, please stop me. These are the 7 specifically identified components of the act that really give us our charge. As we heard from Co-Chair Arcanti, think of this as a guide, but if there are other areas that we believe we should be delving into, let's identify those along the way. When I look at these things, there are 3 questions that kind of come to mind. The first is when we go through each of these items, and we're going to assign these items to working groups to delve into, that will then come up to the task force. We'll go through the structure in a second. But think of these 3 questions as you go through these 7 items. Is it clear what the deliverable is? So as we read through each of these items, is it clear what the legislature is asking us for here? If it's not, then let's clarify it. Let's just, if there are definitions that we have to jump into, if there are key terms that we have to specify, then we'll do that along the way, just so we're being very transparent with how we're reading the deliverable. And if it is, then what are our recommendations? This is all about findings and recommendations that we're going to be delivering to the Energy and Technology Committee in January. So think about those 3 questions as we're working through these 7 items. Also, because, it need not be limited to these things, excuse me, also think about what other things we should be thinking about in terms of this specific area of the statute. All right, so let's go through each of these kind of verbatim. I'll stop at each point along the way. If anyone just wants to jump in or raise their hand who has a comment, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring it to the top of the queue here. So the first item, a review of regulations and legislation needed to guide the development and achievement of economies of scale for the hydrogen ecosystem in the state. That's the first item. A comment I would say here is that we will be providing legal support to this process as well, working through our general counsel, Brian Farnan, who's on the line here, who will work with our legal law firm on this as well. So that resource will be available to help. I see President Merrick, please.
So, Brian, I think when it comes to regulations and legislative needs, we also need to look the neighboring states. In order to hydrogen infrastructure to be deployed and to go on the commercial scales, we have to look regulations. And one of the regulations in Massachusetts, it's in New York, that fuel cells, cars, and buses cannot go under the bridge. And if you compare that to California, and why we have infrastructure in California and Canada, British Columbia, there is no such limitations. And I think that the testing and having commercial vehicles in California and British Columbia showed us and demonstrated that is safe. So I think from the regulations and legislative points, in order to have the fuel cells buses, in order to have the fuel cells cars on the roads, we have to address those issues. And those issues are huge for the manufacturers of the trucks, fuel cells car, and fuel cells buses.
Excellent, great. That's a perfect clarifying point. Like in terms of thinking about the regulation and legislation, what are other states doing, not just ourselves? What's the federal government doing? Even our neighbors in Canada, British Columbia. Great, perfect suggestion there. Like as these sorts of items get picked up by the working groups, these sorts of things would be fleshed out. We would have some support from Stratagen, who we're going to introduce in a bit, our team there, Aaron and Nick, and we'll also have some legal support as well for that process. But great, exactly what we're looking for there. Let me keep going and feel free to stop me along the way. We'll proceed through each one of these. Number 2, recommendations for workforce initiatives to prepare the state's workforce for hydrogen-fueled energy-related jobs. All right, let me keep going. Number 3, an examination of how to position the state to take advantage of competitive incentives and programs created by the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Great, and we heard earlier from the Bureau Chief, Vicki Hackett, about DEEP's efforts in coordinating the regional activity and the leadership of Governor Lamont with the regional governors underneath the Clean Hydrogen Hub proposal. Thank you, Vicki, for that. Yeah, let me leave that there. Any questions, comments on number 3? All right, let's keep going.
So Brian, I'm sorry, I have a comment on number 2 of the workforce initiatives. And
Please.
We have the request on the number of the companies, including the Eversource, and the number of the jobs that are not filled. I think we have to do the survey or customer discovery of the companies in Connecticut and fully understand what are the workforce needs. And that will start with the conventional, traditional companies like Eversource. What are their needs? What are the needs of Nell? What are the needs of Skyray? What are the needs of fuel cells energy? We don't have the programs at university that educate electrochemistry with the power engineering. And we have to define what are those skill sets that students and graduates of Connecticut will have in order to fill those jobs.
Fantastic. Great guidance there. And I see Vicki, you wanted to comment on number 3?
Sure. We're in the process of, thinking about how to put together the working groups for the Clean Economy Council, pursuant to the governor's executive order last year. So we, to the extent people have thoughts about who should be participating in working groups for the Clean Economy Council or on the council itself, for jobs related to hydrogen, please reach out to me and we'd be happy to hear from you. We're looking for, people from the private sector, and, and perhaps from the utilities. It'd be great to have somebody from UConn. So if people have suggestions about who could serve in that capacity, because there are workforce development funds coming in through EJA, and we're working closely with the Office of Workforce Strategy. So please feel free to reach out on that.
Great, thank you, Vicki. And Kathy.
Yeah, I would just echo both of those comments. So I think, not to get into specifics now, but there certainly are very near-term and longer-term needs in terms of jobs for growth. We have positions we can't fill right now. We do hire a lot of UConn grads, but coming up with more of a feeder program, things like that would be really helpful, both in technology and on more of the technical skills, technician type positions.
And I think we have also to think about the new programs that are not only engineering related, but have the background in the legal and business for the energy. A lot of energy jobs don't get created not because of the maturity of the technologies, but because of the lack of the policy. And we have to think how to merge those.
Fantastic. We need more people like Brian Farnan teaching in environmental law and policy courses to get those UConn graduates over into the social sciences. Fantastic. Other questions or comments before I move on to number 4? Okay, cool. Let me move on to number 4. Recommendations for funding and tax preferences for building hydrogen-fueled energy facilities at brownfield sites through the Targeted Brownfield Development Loan Program. So this one's very specific, right? But any questions, comments here? Okay, let me keep going. Number 5, recommendations regarding funding sources for developing hydrogen-fueled energy programs and infrastructure. So more along the funding. There you go, Barbara. Good morning.
Morning, yes. I'm assuming that when you're looking at funding sources, you're also looking at sources, private funding sources. Not only, what may be coming from the state or the federal government, because, whatever we do has to be self-sustained in the sense of that it has to generate its own income. So, so I'm assuming that that was part of the thinking in the funding sources.
Great point. I'm going to ask you to speak to your comment on the insurance industry in a second. So I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. But I really think your point on the importance of public-private partnerships here is really important. Our legislators are really ambitious with these policies. And if we just kind of do the math, we quickly see that it's going to take both public and private investment to achieve those ambitious targets. So whatever we can do to take our policies, regulations, and market context to draw in that private investment will only help to serve to build the green economy that we're after. But did you want to say a little bit about your insurance comment that you made to some of the state staffers before, which I thought was really important and intuitive?
Yes, I think that this is another place, Radenka talked about Connecticut being the center of the hydrogen fuel cell globally. Connecticut is also the insurance capital. And so insurance is an enabler for commercial products. And I think that we have a real opportunity here in Connecticut to come up with an insurance solution that could address some of the issues that were raised here today. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Lauren and Ure and talked about what Radenka mentioned about, cars, hydrogen gas cars. I can't go through the tunnel in Boston. And I said that probably some of those policies come out of the insurance liability and the state and the city having, problems in, ensuring the infrastructure. Insurance is a great risk mitigator. And as we look at bringing hydrogen to everyone, an insurance product will help will help in both in the engagement and in the risk mitigation when you get to retail. So I think that we're very well positioned in Connecticut to take the lead on that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that, Barbara. We definitely got to dive into that one. All right, let me keep going. We're on number 6, an examination of the sources of potential clean hydrogen, including but not limited to wind, solar, biogas, and nuclear. Any questions, comments there? All right, cool. We're gonna get some insights on the colorations of hydrogen. It looks like Radinka, did you have comments? You're on mute. It looks like you're on mute, President Merrick.
It takes
Perfect.
more than 2 years. So I think what Barbara says, we have to link this to the federal funding, state investment, and private sector, and do the scorecard. Where are our strengths? Where is our industry? Who are the suppliers, and what are the needs?
Excellent. Daganto?
I was actually going to suggest kind of thinking about this 1 through 7 almost in reverse order, because it seems like, exactly to Radenka's point, as far as the use cases, the end use cases are concerned, you have fuel security, you have reliability, you have resiliency, you have industrial decarbonization pathways, you have heating, both for commercial heating and residential heating, and then of course transportation sector. If there was a way to derive a demand curve for each of those different use cases, and then draw out a supply curve based on existing technologies, you can find the intersection of supply and demand curves for each of those use cases, and then come up with a sort of a make whole payment. Think about it that way. Like here's today's costs, and here's where we need the cost to get to. And so we'll fill that gap with regulations, with incentive programs, with funding, public and private partnerships. So maybe I don't know how the working groups will be set up, but I would put a lot more emphasis upfront on 6 and 7, and then have more of an effort on the 2, 3, and 4 sort of tied, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of tied to that. And I think the workforce thing can go in a parallel process, but as far as the funding, the investment opportunities, just a thought.
Excellent. Hold that thought. We're going to talk about the structure of the working groups to these numbers in a second. Kathy, I still see your hand up, and Vicki, Kathy?
Yeah, so I had 2 comments. One is on the more the policy and infrastructure side, I guess. I think one of the things besides the bridge and tunnel issue is permitting. So that tends to take an extremely long time, whether it's for a hydrogen project or a station. So I think that's one thing we'll need to address. And then just, I guess, because I don't want us to think about this the wrong way, and we talk about sources, most of those are actually not sources of hydrogen, except for maybe biogas. But even then, I'd say it's reforming of biogas. So I might just want to tweak how we think about that. I mean, it could be, to me, electrolysis is a source of hydrogen. Reforming of natural gas plus CCUS is a form of clean hydrogen. Just to make sure that we're covering the right bases there.
Very good. There you go. There's the sort of the subtlety and the definitions of things that we'll want to work through and just kind of clarify in terms of those 7 items. Vicki, you have your hand up. Is that okay? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going to number 7. Recommendations for potential end uses of hydrogen-fueled energy. Any comments on 7? All right. So in terms of other areas, so those are the 7, and we're going to dive further into each of those within the task forces, but more directly within the working groups, and we'll talk about a working group task force framework in a second. But some of the other things that some of the ex officio members, we got together several weeks ago to kind of think through how this structure might work. But some of the other things that we identified were the following. Environmental justice. How do we think about the role and voice of the community in terms of what's happening here? The insurance industry, we flagged that, Barb, as something to delve into. The transportation, storage, and safety issues around this. So not only do we have sources and uses, but everything in between. So those are several areas that we noted. And so I would just kind of plant the seed for folks to think about other areas. We don't have to think about them now. You could send them to me or you could express them now. Does somebody want to make a comment? I saw a hand kind of going up and down. All right.
Sorry,
Great.
folks, I'm having a technical difficulty. Something's going on with my mouse. I can't lower my hand. So sorry, Brian. If someone wants to do it for me, that'd be great. But for some reason, I'm unable to do it.
Well, no problem at all. Your hand's down now. Okay, let's keep going. That was great. That was exactly the kind of like end of the public policy that we're going to do much more of as we work to flesh this out. Let's keep going now onto the process, Rudy. Great. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So just general ground rules. We're going to try our best to honor the agenda and try to work through the times, the various slots in the agenda, and make sure we're meeting the time. So far it's working pretty well in terms of raising your hand, but you can also chat things through. Rudy, Blair, if there's chats coming through, just signal to me. I can't see them on my end, but just continue to do what you all are doing. That really helps. We're recording this meeting. We're going to create, as you see here, this website down here, the greenbank.com/hydrogen task force is where we're going to house everything, the agendas, the meeting minutes, the notes, the link to these recorded webinars. So we'll make all these available. So those are just at a high level, the ground rules. Let's go to the next chart. This is where folks wanted to really jump in here. So at a high level, the task force has been structured to make the recommendations and findings to the committee of cognizance. So we will do that and issue the report to them the second week of January of 2023. So we thought about 5 different working groups. So let me just work through these, and we're open to thinking about this as well, but realize that we want to manage within the context of our 21 task force members, managing all of your time, the resources we're putting to it, so to be both efficient and effective. So these are the 5 areas that we broke out. So the policy and workforce development working group will be delving into those items. Funding, there are several items of funding there. Then you've got the hydrogen sources, hydrogen infrastructure, and hydrogen uses. So it's almost as if we're going from policy and workforce development, the money, public and private, to the technology as the different working groups. And we're focusing heavily on the technology area from this source to use and everything in between. So that's how we thought about the working group structure. Happy to take comments, suggestions from the task force before we jump into some of the other cross-cutting issues.
No, this looks good. I think having the focus on the hydrogen uses and sources, and then focusing really hard on scenario-based planning of looking out creating a range of scenarios. We'll all be wrong of what we project the future out to be, but being able to have a broad spectrum, thinking very, very big on what the use cases could be, and then backing out from that where the cost is of today's technology, and then funding opportunities needed to get us from here to there. No, I like the structure. Thank you.
In terms of thinking about the supply and demand side, Daganto, that you talked about earlier, which was great, what was coming into my mind was thinking about what's the endpoint, the price today to the endpoint tomorrow, and the whole hydrogen Earthshot just came into my, I'm not proficient in those DOE targets, but I do know the, driving down the hard and soft costs to get to that cost point could be a way to think about that. I don't know, just offering that thought.
Yeah, and also, what really gets missed in this in our industry, unfortunately, is intermittent resources. What hydrogen really brings to the table is it's not intermittent, and being able to really understand. Someone had brought up the insurance industry. Insurance applies not just in the broad context of insurance, but in our industry, it has significant costs in terms of capacity that you need to procure to meet your 1 day in 10 reliability requirement from a generation resource adequacy standpoint. Being able to project out what the future looks like from a clean energy future, excluding hydrogen, I think we will all find that we will have we will be in a place to be able to pay. We're going to be compelled to pay a significant premium for that insurance, being able to procure the adequate amount of resources to be able to be reliably able to serve demand. And that would result in a massive amount of curtailment of intermittent resources during times we don't need it. And that's really where, in at least the energy sector, hydrogen can really play a huge role. So starting out with that bottoms up assessment and then working ourselves back up to the supply end would be really helpful.
Very cool. Excellent. Oh, great. Radhika.
I will be brief, but I think that we have also to think that hydrogen is the most abundant element on the earth. And what is the hydrogen as a storage? So what are the possible scenarios for zero emission, and how hydrogen can be applied as a storage media? And if we electrify everything that we plan to do, what are the other environmental issues and other sustainability issues and grid issues and everything that we are going to face? So I think we have all option scenarios, but we have to think and keep in mind energy storage.
Excellent. Great, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So on the 5 working groups, we worked through them. Just a couple of thoughts on them. One of the things that we want to do is to be able to enable all of your expertise on these working groups. So, you're all passionate about hydrogen. So we want to engage you within these areas of expertise, which is to plant the seed if you're interested in co-chairing. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail on these working groups in a second. So if you're interested in co-chairing a working group, just let me know. I anticipate the task force will meet once a month, the second Tuesday of every month from 10 to noon. But I would anticipate that the working groups would meet once or twice a month. We're still working through the guidance for the working groups, but just to give you a sense, and the working groups would be supported by Stratagen, who I'm going to introduce shortly. It's, the thought that the working groups would do more of the heavier lifting and the detailed analysis and roll up the recommendations that would then come in front of the task force in the latter part of this year. Cross-cutting issues. There are a couple of things that we thought about in this structure. The first was environmental justice, as I noted before. we really think this is important, and, some objectives should come from the Policy and Workforce Development Group. This is not only that group, it cuts across everything, but we feel like it needs to reside somewhere. So the Policy and Workforce Development Group, one of the things we'll task them with first is what's our objective on environmental justice that we can cross-cut across everything else that we've got laid out here in terms of the working group activities. We've heard about supply chain. So let's think about the supply chain safety and R&D across the technology items there on sources, infrastructure, and uses. And then insurance. As I'm hearing more and more here, Barbara D'Agato, we probably want to think about insurance more prominently in this structure. So just kind of flagging that. But anything else cross-cutting that folks are feeling, sensing from this discussion? Please, Kathy.
Maybe not to add, but just in terms of how these cross-cut, I think especially R&D and probably supply chain as well also go across funding, because that's where a lot of the funding needs are.
Great. President Merrick.
Brian, if you can include a case study, like what has happened in California, what is happening in Europe, what is happening in British Columbia, and present those case study, because we are not breaking the ice. There are others that done that for us. So how did they do?
Great suggestion. I know our legislative leaders are often thinking about what are those examples of other states that have done these sorts of things. So that will be important as we dig into all these different areas to be able to point to somewhere where this is working, where the ice has been broken. Great suggestion. Okay, let's keep going. So we're going to dive a little bit more, Rudy. Let's go to the next slide into each of these working groups. So we've got some volunteers from the ex officio members thus far in the working groups. So we're looking for any volunteers for the Policy and Workforce Development Group. This is specifically to the first and second questions within the statute. And then some other things that this working group would think about would include environmental justice and insurance. So we've got Chair Marissa Gillette here as one ex officio to co-chair this working group. Let's go to the next slide. I'll move through these pretty quickly. Funding, we're looking for several co-chairs here on the funding front, which would dive into 3, 4, and 5. So we've got the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We've got the really specific targeted brownfield development loan program. And then we've got other funding sources, and that's really where we'll delve into not only funding, but also financing in the private sector. Barbara.
The co-chairs, do they need to be part of the hydrogen task force? The reason why I ask is in this segment, because it involves the targeted brownfield development loan program, which is under DECD. Can it be chaired by DECD, for example, or someone?
What do task force members think? Great question. Here's my thought on it is that at least one member, at least one co-chair should be on the task force, but that we should be open to that task force member working to identify co-chairs to support, one or more to support these responses. And DECD is a perfect example of that. Feels like the Community Innovation Fund too is, DECD's work there is probably another element. Great question.
It is not only a funding source, but also when we start looking at incentives, the incentive recommendations at the state level anyway, is going to flow through the DECD.
Excellent. Other thoughts?
This is Kathy. I would just say that's consistent with other like federal advisory committees I've been on where, somebody on the committee has to be associated with it, but you can pull members from other places as their expertise supports that.
And Brian, you can also think of advisory group, that is independent of all of those people who have been experts in the field for many years. And I see like one person that we have, Trent Moulton, who is the CEO of Skyra, who built a proton on site, who worked on GE for development of fuel cells or UTC. You can look few experts around the globe, who are going to give independent opinion on the study force and everything that we looked and what we are missing.
Excellent. I'll flag that. Brian, Brian Farnan, we can kind of dig into some of this structural stuff on advisors and how everything rolls up. But I think the point we're taking is let's be flexible to encourage as much expert feedback, independent feedback into this process as possible with the guidance of the legislation as being a guide. Great. Okay, let's keep going, Rudy. Let's go to the next one. So hydrogen sources. So thank you both to Ur and Kathy for volunteering to co-chair the hydrogen sources. This would delve into the number 6 point within the statute. Again, we've got, to your point, Kathy, earlier on sources, feel free. We're going to dissect these things. We'll just bring some more clarity to it. So that we're all comfortable with the findings and recommendations that we'll be bringing to the E&T committee, along with supply chain safety, R&D, environmental justice, and insurance. These are all just kind of the cross-cutting items. Deganto.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, having, one of the main reasons I think hydrogen is very beneficial to us is because we won't be able to electrify areas within Connecticut, right? And the last thing we want to do is build a hydrogen production facility in an area that will then trigger substantial transmission and distribution investment, right? So finding the right places on our grid to produce hydrogen without putting stress on the grid is what we should be focused on. So happy to contribute to this working group as well. Although my interest is not primarily on this, but I'll be happy to participate.
Fantastic. Well, let's go to the next one. Maybe the next one, Deganto. So this is the hydrogen infrastructure, and we don't have any specific of the 7, that are noted here. But the way we tried to think about this was you've got the production and then the end use. What's everything in between? How do you get from here to there? Transportation, storage. There may be other things in that context. So Sarah on my team would be there to help co-chair, and we'd have openings for 1 or more co-chairs for that working group that would really need to specify, what are the 3 things that this working group is looking at that are relative in the context of the Special Act 22-8.
And you'd mentioned earlier if to the extent there's someone from the EDC gas business that are nominated, they would be, she would be a good fit to lead this. My interest is still not in this one either. It's in the next one.
Sarah knew that. I was just trying to go there. All right, let's go to the next one. I think we've got the last one here on the hydrogen uses. So we've got one more slide, Rudy. So the last one on uses, Joel Reinbold of the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology. If you all have seen some of the work he's been doing on supply chains and end-use critical facilities and fuel cells, it's really good. And, again, invite others to consider the uses space here around question number 7 within the statute. So, as you can see, we're starting to try to put some meat on the bones. Our goal is to assemble these working groups for the next meeting at the leadership level, and then begin to articulate what the working groups will be focusing in on, and supporting them with Stratagen. Any final comments on working groups before we get to some remaining items?
No, I'd like to definitely be the co-chair of this one and hopefully expand the scope, but also fuel security, also transportation sector, also commercial heating sector, and of course the decarbonization of the transportation sector and industrial applications.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's go to the next, just a few little E4 objectives. So at a high level, thinking through some of the objectives of this process, first, we're all going to learn as we're going through this. So education is going to be an important part of this, from the task force and working group level all the way to stakeholders. As this begins to roll out, we'll have more and more members of the public attending and listening in and learning and providing their voices into this process, but really digging into the understanding the science of hydrogen and some of the markets for it. So today we're going to get a Green Hydrogen 101 presentation. So we want to really work through 101 to 301 at the national, regional, and local level, to your point, President Merrick. Engagement. Facilitating the interaction of the task forces and the working group members, including the public, voice here, but also touring various facilities around the state. We want to feature some of the things that are happening. So we'll try to move some of these in-person meetings. Everything will be available online. People will have webinar access. That's totally cool. We're just going to try to move some of this space around to do some tours and share with folks what's happening around Connecticut, exciting things. I'll talk about that in a second. And then ultimately enabling the working groups to make recommendations to the task force, which would then work themselves up to the report through to the Energy and Technology Committee. And then lastly, and most importantly, is thinking about how we bring, again, the community voice into this process. We're really open to ideas here. We have some ideas on how to do that. But your ideas are most welcome. All right, let's keep going. So on the education front, so I also wear the hat of being on the Secretary of Energy's advisory board. So I think she would be happy to see this slide, which is really about how to engage the national labs in local activities, place-based initiatives. So we're working really hard to see if we can get these labs to present at one of the future task force meetings on kind of increasingly difficult topics. So we've got a few of them lined up. Thank you, Ur, for your assistance there on lining some of these up. So stay tuned for some of these. Next slide. And then, as I was mentioning before on the engagement, we'll try to float things around. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, going to have our meeting next month at UConn, the Innovation Partnership Building. We're going to see the exciting things happening there. In the Center for Clean Energy Engineering, we'll hear what's being done there. And then working with Kathy, we'll also work on a visit to Proton's or Nell Hydrogen's facility in Wallingford as well. So we're going to try to see if we can bring in some other items here from the nuclear power of Dominion to Doosan to fuel cell energy, but we want to move things around a little bit to share the love of what's happening in and around Connecticut on this important topic. All right, next slide. So more structure just in terms of the task force meeting. So I noted before, so if you can save the date on your calendars, the second Tuesday of every month from 10 to noon, that's when we'll do these online meetings. If we have tours, we'll extend it for lunch to 1:30 for a tour of the site and lunch on site. Any thoughts? We'll leave these with you. In terms of future agendas, you can see what we're laying out. We have more clarity in terms of next month and the month after. It starts to become less clear when we get into October, because that's when the working groups are going to be diving into things. But let's go to the next slide, Rudy. So you can see here, our hope is that by November, we'll start to have working group findings and recommendations coming into the task force so that we can begin to wrap our arms around them, debate them, discuss them, give enough guidance to go back so that when we come into December, hopefully December, we're looking at final recommendations, and then it's just, assembling all the materials together. As Barbara so rightly noted, in the November, December time period, everything slows down here in Connecticut. So we really need all that build up into November, get all of our thoughts, things down, and then let's just start writing in December. We'll have, things produced for the early January time period. And one last slide before I do an introduction to Stratagen. Next slide, Rudy. Our next meeting is going to be August 9th. I was noting at the Yukon Innovation Partnership Building. There are the details. We'll send this meeting invite out to all of you. And again, there's the web link for you to access information on the hydrogen task force. All right, so we are now going to move to our partners in all of this. One of the things we did with our Green Bank team about a month and a half ago was recognizing that we need a partner with us to help facilitate and coordinate these interactions. As you all know, this takes a lot of time and effort, and it needs technical assistance along the way to dig in to certain areas, as we've been talking about. Our team assembled an RFP really quickly. It really built around the statute. We had in my 2 decades of being here in Connecticut on clean energy, the best proposals that came in wanting to help this effort forward. It was really incredible. The expertise we got from the outside wanting to support this process. And in the end, we selected Stratagen, and the firm, you're going to get a sense of them here today, but I'm just really excited to introduce Aaron Childs and Nick Connell from Stratagen, who are going to dig into a Green Hydrogen 101 presentation here today. But you should know that they've kind of written the guidelines book on the green hydrogen guidelines. They're helping the LA Basin on their regional green hydrogen hub. They've been involved in, I think, the whole West Coast, maybe Pacific Northwest. They'll give some details on their regional hydrogen hub. So they are very actively involved in providing their expertise to support those processes. But why don't I turn it over to you, Aaron and Nick, to introduce Green Hydrogen 101.
Thank you so much, Brian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Childs, and it is a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm a director at Stratagen Consulting with a focus specifically on enabling scaled deployment of clean energy technologies, including green and clean hydrogen. So just a little bit of background about our organization. If you wouldn't mind maybe going to the next slide. Stratagen is a mission-driven consulting company that is focused on enabling a clean and just transition. Stratagen works with clients across the clean energy ecosystem, including regulators, consumer and environmental advocates, technology developers, utilities, and members of impacted communities. Some of you may have heard the name Stratagen from the work that we've been doing with Pura on developing innovative regulatory frameworks, and we're really excited to continue our work here in Connecticut. I'm so excited to, in just a minute, introduce my colleague, Nick Connell, also director at Stratagen. Nick serves primarily as the policy director for the Green Hydrogen Coalition. Nick has deep expertise on hydrogen policy and commercialization pathways and has been focusing specifically on engaging and educating state policymakers to support the development of sound and informed hydrogen policy. If you go to the next slide, I can dig in a little bit on some of Stratagen's hydrogen background that Brian mentioned. So just to give maybe a couple of highlights on the work that we've been doing, I think first and foremost, it's helpful to note that Stratagen's work in green hydrogen really originated from some of the electric sector impacts. We were really looking at some of the challenges, especially in California, with integrating this really high level of renewable adoption, and we're seeing hydrogen as a critical resource for balancing and storing renewable energy. In 2019, Stratagen founded the Green Hydrogen Coalition in the GHC, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to advancing green hydrogen production and use at scale. Some of the key initiatives that Stratagen has been supporting on behalf of the Green Hydrogen Coalition include, as Brian mentioned, some efforts to do some hub visioning and facilitation in the LA area. So in that work, we have been evaluating hydrogen offtake opportunities, including in the power sector, in industrial applications, and most recently moving into mobility applications that include on-road vehicles, ships, port activities, etc. Sorry, if you wouldn't mind going back to the previous slide. The other really important piece of work that we've been doing here, I think, is engaging with communities to understand impacts, job and labor impacts associated with a scaled hydrogen economy, and looking at some of the policy enablers that will be needed. So I think some of those topics came up in pretty good depth from the task force today. So we're really excited to share some of our learnings from that work. We have also been doing some really great work facilitating regional coordination through the Western Green Hydrogen Initiative, and that has been due to Nick's great leadership, but really bringing together states from across the Western Interconnect to have a discussion on policy best practices and understand how regional coordination on hydrogen can help to accelerate and scale deployment. So hopefully some relevant learnings for folks, and we're really excited to share those. But with that, I am going to turn things over to Nick to run through a Hydrogen 101 discussion. Nick, there's some really good content in here. Would you prefer for folks to save their questions until the end, or do you want to take them as they come along?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Aaron. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. I say we just, let's go through it. And if questions come up, just raise your hand and I think we could address it. As Aaron mentioned, this is a 101, so some of this stuff may be relatively basic, but we could add some color to it, as well as I know some topics that came up around what's going on regionally, internationally. So I'm happy to fill in those gaps too, as that comes up with, where we're at in the stages within production, storage, transportations, and so forth.
Thanks so much, Nick. The floor is all yours.
Perfect. All right. So next slide, please. So as Aaron noted, Nick Connell, I'm the policy director for Stratagen. My largest client is the Green Hydrogen Coalition. Within that, I lead all of our core policy activities. So primarily working in the state of California with all the state agencies between research and development, pipeline infrastructure, long-term gas planning, long duration energy storage, as well as on the transportation side, expanding the low carbon fuel standard. And so really creating innovative ways to help meet decarbonization goals. And so through this 101, I just want to frame up a basic understanding of hydrogen, including production, storage, and use, identify some of the green hydrogen end user ecosystem, and understand some of the really fundamental policy and regulatory activities that are occurring today, as well as activities that this task force could use. And I think, President America hit it right on the head. It's like, what's going on regionally? Let's not reinvent the wheel. We could use a lot of these things that have been vetted and process has been put in place, and we could start implementing those relatively quickly. So next slide, please. Yeah, and I think that's kind of why we're all here today. Anytime you go on S&P Global, you go on Utility Dive, there's a new article about green hydrogen or clean hydrogen or something that the DOE is doing in relation to hydrogen hubs or a new hydrogen hub announcement, states working together through MOUs and so forth. So I think this slide is really self-explanatory, is that, there's huge momentum going on right now in the green or clean hydrogen space. And it's really critical time too, as we continue to push for more renewables and more decarbonized grid, we need to start thinking really strategically. And I heard this word come up time and time in the earlier discussions, is resiliency and reliability. And I think that is a key factor, especially on the energy sector side. So planning now for the future will be critical. Next slide, please. And just as some primers, so just looking globally, and I'll touch on this in the next slide, but really looking at the production of hydrogen today in the amount of CO2 that it's releasing is equivalent to the emissions of Germany. So looking at the global hydrogen emissions that is going on is equivalent to the emissions that are just coming out of Germany alone. So again, this is really due to the feedstock that is producing the hydrogen, being gray or brown, so using coal, other types of fossil fuel uses. And so next slide. And so green hydrogen, it can decarbonize today's global hydrogen economy markets. But as you can see here, looking at the bottom, only a small fraction of this is coming from renewable resources or renewable feedstocks. Primarily, today's global hydrogen value chains are coming either from natural gas or coal, and in some cases, just grid electricity or oil. And so again, this is the paradigm today, but we are seeing that paradigm shift, especially at the federal level, as well as states working together to change this narrative. So next slide. Oh yeah, President Merrick.
Nick, if I can just add observation. So we have recent visit of Secretary of Energy of US coming to Connecticut, and she said she doesn't want to blue and green hydrogen conversation. She wants to see more of sustainable and renewable. And we are not going, if we call the hydrogen coming from natural gas a blue, and we said we produce CO2, we are not going to be 100% renewable in any time of feasible future. But we have the technologies that are capturing the CO2 from the natural gas and making the useful fuels. And we have the technologies that are mature and making the products and making the electrolysis of CO2. So we have to look at the portfolio and maturity of the technologies that are capturing CO2, but I think we have to go more onto sustainable and renewable instead of dividing the hydrogen on the green and blue.
I completely agree. And I think every state or region will have different resources, and to utilize those resources will be critical. And moving away from colors is a foundational policy topic that we are discussing right now between British Columbia, Alberta, as well as 11 Western states on how to figure out a way to move from this. And I do have a slide on that too. And it's really just not looking at colors anymore. I think colors are a good way for us to have the conversation, so we kind of speak in layman's terms. But I think it's critical that we go to a quantitative approach and we start looking at the carbon emissions emitted per kilogram of hydrogen, similar to what the Department of Energy is doing. And so with that, I just, again, I'm just painting the picture here. So just looking at hydrogen from renewables, as many of us know that, producing hydrogen from renewables today is more expensive than producing it from fossil fuel resources. So this is just on the production side. This is not looking at the delivered costs. So the production may look a little bit lower because sometimes you'll hear, oh, at the tailpipe, if I'm filling up my hydrogen car, it's about $16 per kilogram because that's the delivered cost. But looking at the production costs, it's around $5 to $6 depending on the region. And so next slide. But by 2050, and these numbers come from Bloomberg, we're looking at, in the US, as we continue to scale renewables, as we continue to have manufacturing domestically and increase our domestic manufacturing, either through electrolyzers or future technology resources that are coming out through research and development, these costs are going to drop significantly. And this is just 2050, but this is, again, just painting a picture as we see the paradigm shift between the fuel sources or feedstock sources that we're using to produce that hydrogen. Next slide. And so really the hydrogen supply chain, and this is critical, and this is something that I'm seeing the task force doing, so hat off to you, is already looking at these key components. It's really broken up into 4 key components. So it's the production, it's transportation, it's the storage, and it's the offtake. Any way you want to get to economy of scale, you need to figure out each side of this equation. Without that, I mean, if you're producing really cheap hydrogen, but then you have to transport on truck or rail, and there's no incentive or there's no way of doing that. The cost could increase significantly, or if you have no demand, if you have no off takers, it's going to make it very challenging. So it is a chicken and egg, but we need to figure out the scenario and look at all types of the supply chain in order to lower the cost.
I think there's a question from Barbara.
Oh, hey, Barbara.
Yes, and so based upon your last slide, the cost going down at 2050. So are we looking between now and 2050 a price shock for the consumer?
Well, potentially. So I think that Brian hit on the earth shock as well, what DOE is planning to do. So they're looking at $1 produced by 2030. So with different incentives, it's really going to be incentive driven to lower those costs. But there's also other strategies that could be implemented from a policy standpoint for off takers, from a price shock standpoint, like a contracts for difference for industrial off takers. So say if you're using fossil fuel based hydrogen at your industrial facility, if you give some type of contracts for difference, so like a government type of subsidy, it could help lower the cost and create some sustainability for those end users instead of having that crazy volatility going on.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the consumer, especially those that are not financially able to pay for this. And in this task force, we're talking about equity and we're talking about environmental justice. It will be a great injustice if we were to bring to the market something that will just add to the burden of poor people in our state.
Of course, and I think that is critical as well. As you start thinking about, say, on the energy sector in particular, you think about the future of the grid. Renewable resources transmission upgrades are very costly. And if you start looking at the trade-offs of actually, okay, we could repurpose some, say, thermal generating facilities with hydrogen, we could repurpose the pipelines, and you could start looking at the cost difference, especially when you're bringing it down to ratepayers in those communities. Another environmental justice aspect too is usually those communities of concern, those are the individuals that have the facilities or production facilities in their backyards. And so looking at those climate impacts as well as job impacts is very important. And that's some of the work that we're doing today through one of our initiatives called Ideal Los Angeles. We're looking at the air impacts, we're looking at the cost impacts, and we're looking at the job impacts. And we will have a lot of those results later this year. But again, it's really a critical piece of the puzzle. And when you think about environmental justice and stakeholder engagement, it's important to do it at the onset to ensure that those communities of concern's voice are heard at the beginning instead of just looking at the low-hanging fruit from the individuals that may not be as impacted. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are many ways to produce green hydrogen, such as electrolysis, steam methane reframing of biogas, and thermal conversion of biomass. The way that we really look at green hydrogen, again, going away from colors, it's on a carbon intensity framework. So looking at anything that is zero or carbon negative. So in some cases, producing biomass or hydrogen via biomass could be carbon negative if you look at it from a life cycle basis. And this is just a representation on different ways that you could produce zero or low carbon hydrogen. So next slide. And so electrolyzers, the reason I threw this slide up is because the conversation of long duration storage. And so electrolysis is really a promising option for carbon-free hydrogen production from renewable or nuclear resources in some cases. Electrolysis process essentially just uses electricity to split the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And so these units could be used on a smaller basis or at a larger basis to support in cases when we talk about energy storage. So I think many of us are familiar with energy storage or lithium batteries where we put them behind the meter. We have them for 2 to 4 hours, but as we continue to decarbonize the grid, we're going to have needs for longer duration storage. And this is really a niche market that hydrogen can play a role in. especially when looking at those 10 to 12 to 24 to weekly, monthly, or even seasonal storage. One use case we're doing is in Delta, Utah through the Intermountain Power Project. We're looking at seasonal storage up to 3 months through one of the salt domes. And I'll share an example here on what utilizing a salt dome could actually do from a storage standpoint. But electrolyzers are very unique because they can act like a battery. They have fast dispatch. You could use them for resource adequacy, ancillary services. So a variety of resources that you could use it as a flexible load. And so a lot of different gas utility companies are considering this, especially for longer durations and especially meeting grid needs with it's either constrained or you need curtailment from renewables. You could take that curtailed renewable, you could actually convert it to hydrogen and put it back onto the grid later. And this is one way that we could actually get to a 24-hour renewable grid is so if you're producing the hydrogen during high renewable times and then you're dispatching it onto the grid during the night, and actually instead of using a gas peaker, you could use hydrogen. And so again, this is one way to solve the puzzle. As you hear individuals talk about 24-hour renewable grid. So next slide. And so just real fast on this, I will touch that hydrogen storage. Really, there's two commercial types of hydrogen storage at this time. We have physical based and material based. We are seeing a lot of individuals or new companies come up with material based, especially like metal hydride systems. This one really cool company called GKN. I encourage any of you to check them out because they actually have like it's a box, it's self-containing with electrolyzer, a fuel cell, and it's just a storage device, and they could actually stack it. So if you wanted 8 hours, 16 hours, they would just put the boxes out. And so it's almost like how Bloom Energy for fuel cells, how they have Bloom boxes, like the same thing for hydrogen solutions. So definitely a lot of new technology solutions coming out. But what we're seeing mainly right now is physical-based storage, so geologic storage. If your state is blessed with geological salt domes, compressed gas, or liquid. And so next slide. And so here's an example, as I mentioned earlier, the Intermountain Power Project. And so what we'll be using this project for, as we're working through, is having this as a storage facility that would actually pump 100% green hydrogen via pipeline into the LA Basin and have it for firm dispatchable needs. So looking at one cavern, it has a huge amount of hydrogen capacity that it could store up to 5,000 tons. So this equivalent to fueling 200 hydrogen buses, 100,000 or a million fuel cell cars, and 1,500 or 150,000 megawatt hours of energy storage. And so at this facility, they have over 100 caverns. So this is just one. So the capability of salt caverns is really critical. So when you think about regional hubs and as you expand and having individuals with type of geologic storage being a potential component or that could go into a gas grid as you reform pipeline would be a critical component. Next slide. So once the hydrogen is stored, hydrogen can be transported. So there's 3 different types of transportation methods. So you could have dedicated pipelines, or you could put hydrogen blended natural gas pipelines. You could actually trail it on the road using hydrogen trailers or liquid tankers, or you could ship it overseas. So when we talk about imports and exports, or you could ship it from, say, New York to California, something along those lines. But what we're seeing here, especially through a lot of our research, is pipelines are the most cost-effective solution in the long term. Primarily 100% dedicated pipelines. So you could look at the EU Backbone Initiative. They actually released a really great report on what they're doing to their gas infrastructure, either through retrofits or complete decommissioning and installing new pipelines. Next slide. And so the solution, and this came up in the task force earlier, it's, what are the end uses? And I think it's very specific on, what is your overall need? Through the different states, as well as provinces that we've been working with, here are 8 different applications that we're finding an immediate need. So agriculture, so you could do ammonia production for fertilizer. Industrial applications, very hard to electrify because of the process heat that is required. Heavy duty trucking, you can't really electrify heavy duty trucks because every time you stop, you're going to have to recharge that battery. Anyone that has an electric vehicle, you'll know it'll take millions of hours to get to your destination, especially if it's over 400 miles. Maritime shipping, it's a great solution, especially for zero carbon fuels. Same with aviation. We're working with different aviation companies on figuring out solutions for SAF fuels. Clean power, back to the energy sector, looking for long duration storage or for thermal generating facilities. So retrofitting combustion turbines or replacing them with fuel cells for ramping needs in local grid pockets of constrained mining, and then lastly, long duration energy storage. So these are just a couple applications that I could touch on. But again, as you could see, these are really the hard to electrify or hard to abate sectors on some specific applications. So clean or renewable hydrogen could really play a key factor here. The next slide. Now, I'll just touch on this briefly because I know we're almost at time. And so again, green hydrogen can repurpose the energy system where, really relied on it for the longest time is, we have fossil fuel feedstocks, oil refining, natural gas process, and we could really change this narrative to using renewable resources and still having a zero carbon fuel of the future that can meet those reliability needs. And it will be critical, especially, in some of the policy conversations we're having throughout the United States. I think the biggest component is the pipeline transport. Not only intrastate, but interstate, because of the regulatory regime that is around pipeline authority. It is not necessarily clear, so there could be some jurisdictional issues, and permitting came up as well, and safety. So starting to identify those questions is going to be critical at the onset, especially when you start looking at system planning and what can and cannot be installed when you start putting steel on the ground. So next slide. So what are the biggest barriers? Just recapping, it's infrastructures and economy of scale really drives cost. So it's having those four key components. It's the production, it's the transportation, it's the storage, and it's the offtake. And figuring out all those key components will undoubtedly drive down cost. Next slide. And as many of you noted, the hydrogen highlights and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, they dedicated over $9.5 billion for clean hydrogen. Within this too, one key component I would keep an eye out for is the Justice 40, especially the environmental justice components, especially when looking at hydrogen hubs or hydrogen funding from the DOE. This is going to be critical. So that should be definitely at the forefront when starting to look at the energy, environmental, and equity justice components. And so next slide. Just go through this. And so just looking at a key example here, and this is the Western Interconnect. So it's the British Columbia, Alberta, 11 Western states. We're really seeing definitions appear. This to me is the most fundamental policy implementation that will be critical, especially if you're looking at interstate collaboration or international collaboration, because having a definition that is too stringent or too loose can make it very hard, especially when you start looking at a renewable future where you're starting to put a price tag on the hydrogen you're producing. What we call, as many of you know, is like a REC system, like the renewable energy certificates. When hydrogen starts moving into that, you need to be able to understand what type of hydrogen is being produced and what type of hydrogen that you are purchasing. Next is roadmaps. I think, we're sitting here on the task force today. You guys are awesome. You're ahead of the curve. So that's very exciting. We're seeing this pop up a lot of other places. And, one recommendation would really be looking at what other roadmaps have done. What kind of targets are they setting? How are they aligning the targets? Are they aligning them on decarbonization goals? Are they aligning them on, job growth, what have you? And lastly, market development. this number is probably antiquated at this point because I feel like every day there's a new announcement, but we're seeing more and more public and private renewable hydrogen activities being identified. And this includes pilots, demonstrations, and full-scale deployment. And so next slide. And I'll leave with this, President Merrick touched on this, and Doctor, I guess. Sorry, I don't know which is the better to call it. But, we're seeing an increase of differing hydrogen shades. So looking at blue, gray, black, what have you. And so really the key fundamental policy to implement is the definition and looking at a carbon intensity framework. One thing you could do is look at, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the definition they put in place there. It's a 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. The only issue with that definition that I will note, if anyone wants to look at it, is it looks at the point of production. It doesn't look at any type of upstream emissions impacts. We've been having conversations with the DOE as well as the EPA around this, and developing a type of life cycle assessment will be critical to setting a definition. So without getting too much into the weeds, I included some key questions for developing a carbon intensity framework. I'm happy to jump into any of these offline or at another time. So President Merrick, I think you have a question. Might be on mute.
I will just briefly share some of my experiences in Canada before moving to Connecticut 12 years ago. And in Canada, we have in British Columbia, and then across the Canada, we have this hydrogen highway all the way from San Diego to Whistler. And we had the roadmap of the hydrogen infrastructure that aligns with the federal government priorities, Providence priorities, cluster priorities of the companies. And then the most important component was the public perception. So we had to develop the public education, technology deployment and demonstration side where we will bring the people in British Columbia, in Vancouver, it was UBC and National Research Council of Canada, where we put the hydrogen stations, we will fuel the buses, we will fuel the car, we will do the studies, we will have that public acceptance that is based on experience, not based on the bad news and the press. That is very important to be component of this because public needs to see the benefit, public needs to be aware, public needs to have experience and connections in order to embrace the new technologies.
Completely agree. The public perception, especially around education, advocacy, and you will see a lot of spins on hydrogen. You see the articles come up all the time with different op-eds that may not be scientifically proven. And so ensuring that narrative is correct will be critical. But getting that collaboration on the onset is very important. But I think that is the conclusion of the 101. But happy to take any other questions. Again, this was just a primer. I think that here's some key takeaways, but just to set the stage, and happy to go into a deep dive on any of these in the future. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Aaron, for that. That was great. Definitely wetting our whistle, getting us going here with the task force. I think we will just kind of hold questions, but we will make the connections with Nick and Aaron as we build the process kind of moving forward. So thank you, everyone. That was great. I'm gonna so before I transition us to public comment, thank you for this launch. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I feel like we've got a better handle on the structure for moving forward. As we look at next month's meeting at UConn, for those of you who can join us in person, we will have more conversations around those areas that we identified in the statute and the working group focus. And we're just going to keep digging in. Today was great. Our Stratagen team, I'm sure, is going to do summaries. We're going to do a debrief and figure out what we kind of can pull from this to build into the next meeting next month. So just want to thank you all for being with us here today. Feel free to stay with us at public comment. We may have a public comment or two. Let me see if there's anybody who wants to provide public comment. Just raise your hand or open your mic. Okay. Okay, so I think everyone here is supporting task force members. So we will get this out through our channels. We would invite everybody else to kind of tweet and social media this on out, just so that we can start to begin to reach a broader audience. Again, today was more structural. As we move ahead, we're going to definitely want to build in the environmental justice elements, as we've been talking about, and the public engagement aspect into the process. But thank you all for your time and for your dedication to supporting this hydrogen power study task force. And we're looking forward to working with you and your teams going forward. So everyone have a great rest of the week, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.